Welcome to Solar Nations 2, a grand strategy game with massive potential. Some pretty rough edges, and a vision that's too ambitious to ignore. In this video, I want to break down what Solar Nations 2 is doing right, where it's struggling, and why I think, despite everything, it could be the next cult strategy hit if it can just survive early access and updates continue to come out. So, Solar Nation 2 puts you in the control of a nation vying for control over planets, moons, and space stations in our solar system. It's not really like fantasy, sci-fi fantasy. It's a somewhat gritty, near-future vision of Earth politics. There's a pretty decent amount of lore for at least the start of the game. So the game starts in 2092 AD, and Earth and the galaxy at large has changed a lot from the 2020s. World War III happened sometime in the 2040-2050s, and that should have shook up the established world powers. It caused China to descend into civil war, many EU countries turned to technocracy and united into the European Economic Zone. It also seems like they might have sponsored a communist revolution in the American Empire, which caused America to sort of balkanize, with the pre-war government still owning a lot of pre-war territory, except for parts of the West Coast. A new Texas Republic seceded, and New England is now owned by communist revolutionaries. But other than that, America is mostly intact. Russia is probably the only superpower left standing, unscathed after World War III. They chose to ally with NATO and were able to beat back the Chinese. They have allied with Spain and Italy to help deter the technocratic menace from expanding farther in Europe. And I haven't even mentioned all the new solar nations. Almost every planet in our solar system that is technically habitable is habited by brand new star nations that have recently sprung up after being cut off with Earth, although not entirely. It's actually a lot of alt history shenanigans, like almost every ideology is represented. You can play as ANCAPs on the moon, or you can play as some Roman Empire wannabes on Mars. I mean, space is the final frontier in this universe, and it's the only way to find freedom and safety from the old world regimes on Earth. I honestly think the lore reminds me of like Ahoy 4 mod, kinda. I mean, the lore isn't very deep, it doesn't make like too much sense, but I think it's great for role playing, and there's enough lore there that you don't have to read books on the subject matter. There's still room to make your own canon, make your own lore, fit in whatever you want to fit in. But I honestly think this game is just so ambitious. This isn't just Earth with stars in the background, just looking at a top-down view. The game includes all inhabitable celestial bodies in the solar system. All the major ones at least. All of our planets and then all of the planets' moons are able to be colonized. You can build in them. You can fight over them. You can play as a brand new nation in them. But unfortunately, having all of this alone doesn't make a great strategy game. And I think that's sort of where Solar Nations 2 starts to wobble a little bit. But before I talk about some of the issues in the game, I want to talk about the actual gameplay loop, what you'll be doing for most of the time that you stare at the screen. So when you start the game, you get to choose a nation to play as, whether on Earth or another planet, and then it just drops you off. There is no tutorial, there is nothing. So first on the screen, you're going to see a pretty mediocre UI, and there's a lot of information and numbers on it. So first on the left is your treasury. So this is pretty self-explanatory. It's how much money you have and how much you're earning per year. Next is your stability, which shows how stable your nation is. And you can also use the stability to declare war and change your government type and policies. Then next is your research/unity bar. You use both of those resources that you can produce and then also expand by building education or entertainment centers. These are just used to research different things, whether that's new technology or more cultural based things like free markets or revolutionary thought. Next, you'll see the culture tab. That'll tell you who's accepted in your nation and how many people live in your country. Next is the army tab. That's where you're going to be recruiting all your units. You can train units individually or just train army templates. And there is a lot of different units, but I'll talk more about that once I start to talk a bit more about the military gameplay of the game. And then underneath all of your resources are your capacities. So this determines how many units and industrial buildings you're able to maintain and build. So, if you build too many tanks or jet planes, that might deplete the industrial capacity of your nation or the naval capacity of your nation. When it goes into the negatives, you get certain debuffs. At a certain percent, it's 100% debuff. Pretty easy, not really too in-depth. So now that all of that is out of the way, we can actually start playing the game, and the gameplay loop is pretty simple. You will build buildings, which increase your army capacity, increase your revenue, which you can then use to expand your army and space fleet, and then you can use those to, of course, conquer territory and expand your nation. So you have full control over the military of your nation. After you declare war, you will send your units to an enemy-held title or through another nation with military access. And then after you occupy it for a set amount of time, you can then conquer the region, and then you only annex it after you sign a peace treaty. It's a pretty basic system, you know, point and click, just have more and better troops in them and you win. But there is a lot of units. There's infantry, tanks, artillery, aircrafts, and then there's also more futuristic stuff like spacecrafts or super carriers or flying fortresses. But of course, this is a more futuristic world. There is also still nukes and other advanced weapons that you can use to annihilate your opponent. So there is sort of the threat of nuclear Armageddon, because if both sides have them, you can threaten to use them, and if you don't back down, then both sides will launch them. But eventually you can just build defense against missiles, and the AI, at least from when I play, doesn't really seem to build nukes or anything else like that, so, you know, mutually assured destruction doesn't really apply when the other side doesn't build any. But, you know, the game tried, at least I think, once they, you know, tweak the AI a little bit, some more updates come out, it'll work as intended. But other than combat, you will be researching new tech or building buildings in your newly conquered territory. There's plenty of types of buildings. The buildings all produce a certain type of resource or modify resource production, and then you get those resources and then you sell them for money, which increases your treasury, so then you can build more buildings to increase your revenue by building resource buildings. You know, it's a pretty closed loop. There is also a bit of a political system. It's a bit more like a Stellaris, you know, political system. Your government policies determine your government type, but your government type doesn't really matter. It's more just some flair, some flavor. And your policies are the only thing that really give you bonuses. And again, it's mostly just some set dressing. You know, you can have a fascist monarchy, a communist, you know, commune of workers, democracy, an empire. You know, there's a bunch of different ones. I think maybe in the future politics might be updated, but for now it's mostly just an afterthought. Again, I think it lends itself to a lot of role playing. You know, there's a lot you can sort of do with it if you're willing to engage with it as just some nice set dressing, some flair. But other than that, doesn't really do anything to change the game too much. But I mean, generally the game is in a pretty rough shape. I mean, the AI, it seems to just sort of throw its troops at you instead of ever taking time to recover their strength before attacking. The UI is also pretty clunky. I mean, it's serviceable, but you know, sometimes when you enter a menu, you have to press the menu button again to exit. Then other times when you press another menu button, you can just press the escape button to exit. You know, I wish they'd overhaul a little bit, make it look a bit nicer, and then it'd also help if they just explained anything about it to you. I mean, a tutorial would be pretty nice, because the UI honestly makes the game seem really confusing and overwhelming, when it's really not. This is not a complicated game. This is not a hard game. You know, most systems are pretty basic in it. Another big complaint that I have is the micromanagement required. When you start to own a lot of land and manage colonies on other star systems, it becomes very tedious to just have to constantly click to construct buildings in every province. You know, if you own 20 territories to build one thing in each of your territories, you're gonna have to click 20 times, and it really starts to add up because there's just so much land to manage in this game. I think it'd be nice if you could even just construct buildings in groups of 5s or 10s, because at a certain point you have so much money coming in, it doesn't even feel necessary to sort of slog through the tedious construction process. But, you know, overall, even as I say I love that, I think the game is worth it. I mean, Solar Nations 2 it's pretty far from finished. You know, I think they're still in the beta, it's early access. But underneath the somewhat bad AI, the sort of awkward UI, and the just general lack of polish, I think it's a pretty genuinely unique grand strategy concept with some pretty decent bones. I think as they continue to add more and more, it'll just get better and better. So if you're the type of player who can sort of just dig into a new raw game without a lot of polish and onboarding, really do give it a shot. But if that's not your thing, I'd probably wishlist it and come back to it in a year. But that's all I have. Thank you so much for watching and liking, and it would really help me out if you could subscribe. I'm almost monetized. That'd be nice. But that's all I got. Please remember that Jesus loves you.